This is a true crime podcast. It contains adult themes and content and may not be suitable for all listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
You lost all constitutional rights the moment you walked through that door. When the judge sat down there, I sentenced you to 10 years at the Idaho State Penitentiary. You walked in that door, you was a number. And the inmates understood that.
If you're out there and live past the period to be in here, just lay down and do it.
Those inmates that were here in the institution during an execution, it had an impression on them that maybe was still with them to some extent. Maybe they don't think about it anymore, but it had an impression on them, I'm sure.
They wouldn't let me out until I get back to stuff. 7 months later, I give it back to them.
That was one of the problems we ran into. Is you had 5 or 6 guys that were sitting in a place, smoking and joking and drinking coffee. Pretty quick, they'd hatched a plan in there to get under your skin some way or try to figure a way out.
Welcome, folks, to a special off-season episode of the Behind Gray Walls podcast. My name's Anthony, and today Samuel, Skye, and I are joined by Old Penn staff member Jacey Brain and local artists Sue Latta and Ryan Harrison, better known as Chopsy. And we are excited to announce the release of our new publication, 32 Cells, Artistic Reflections on the Old Idaho Penitentiary, which is an over 200-page book that contains art from over 70 local and regional artists and fascinating history and stories from the Old Idaho Penitentiary. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. I kind of wanted to start with you, JC, and talk kind of just the release of this book and the work that's gone into it, and then really focus on Sue and Chopsy's, how you went about taking the interpretation, the history that we provide you, and interpreting that into some art that appears in this book.
That sounds great to me, and I will try not to be too long-winded because I am also more excited to hear from Sue and Ryan. So, also let me say thank you guys for coming. We're always honored whenever you guys give your time to us for this show, for this publication, for the podcast, for everything you do. So thank you so much, and thank you to Anthony and Samuel and Skye for having me and us here. So those of you that are maybe not local or of the not yet initiated, the 32 Cells Art Show was a program that we started in 2016. It was a summer program, and it was a partnership with the Swell Artist Collective. Our administrator, Amber at the time, set up this connection with friends at Swell Artist Collective to give local artists stories of people who worked here or lived here, were incarcerated here. When I say lived here, it's because we had some animal stories in there too. And then create an art show based off of it. That 32 cells number came from, and Anthony, you might have to correct me on this, the number of cells that we had in 4-house and 5-house, the number of cell doors that we had open to use to display pieces, correct?
Yes, and visitors today, you can tell which ones can't be accessed because of the inch of dust and dirt that are in those cells, so...
Yes, yeah. Because we get in there and clean. We also let people sleep in them these days too. So Halloween's coming. But that show had a tremendous success both with the artists who participated and with the public who came to see it. And it's been sort of an institution here ever since. We're on our 9th year now, so coming up on 10 years. And after we had hit 5 years of this show, we started looking at creating a book to preserve the artwork in this and forever combine it with the stories from those first 5 years of the show into something that would be available for researchers and for guests, for anyone who wants to be able to access those stories and for those stories to be able to live on for future generations. I didn't say bring them to life. I didn't say that, but for them to live on. and be accessible to future generations, right? And so we worked with all of the artists who had participated in those first 5 years in order to make sure that they were on board, grab permission in order to use those pieces within the book. And as it would be something that benefits the Idaho State Historical Society in the long run. And then we moved forward with the help of of Evermore Prints downtown, helped us get high quality scans of all these art pieces. We went through a hiring process for a graphic designer. We put that out as a public application, and Kristen Cullen of Interval, full name of that company is Interval, the design studio of Kristen Cullen. She was the person who we chose for that project, and she is amazing to work with. Just a wonderful local graphic designer has encyclopedic knowledge of font or typefaces, and
she's really written the book on graphic design,
right,
several books, graphic design and everything else. Great choice.
Oh, she was, I feel like she let us steer the boat, but she had kind of a hand on it a little bit, and it was just and it just turned out so beautifully. And we received this book in the mail in May of this year, and got the shipment, and couldn't wait to show it off to people. And it is finally being released on August 17th at the 9th annual 32 Cells art show here at the Old Idaho Penitentiary, the theme of which is all in a day's work or occupations of those who were incarcerated here, their day jobs, right? And that's essentially the background. One of my jobs is to managing the retail at the Old Idaho Penitentiary, and I'll tell you guys the things that sell the best are books on the site, and it's a shame that that's something that takes so much work and time and craftsmanship when it's the thing that people want the most of. And so whenever we're able to put a new one out, we're adding a lot of value to what people can take home with them from the site. This is the third Old Idaho Penitentiary publication that we put out, but it's the first that is a full book and under our own direction. I guess fourth if you count The Warden's Son, which Anthony worked with on Hidden Shelf, but that was less team and more Anthony is serving as a consultant, right? Mm-hmm. And so yeah.
Yeah, and of course, check out the link in the description of this episode to order any of these 4 books from our website. Check it out. But I think with that, should we turn it over to some of our artists?
I would love that.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
As we mentioned, we invited Ryan Chopsy Harrison and Sue Latta here. Ryan is on his 6th piece this year. Mm-hmm. This year, the 2024 show. And Sue has participated twice, and both of those pieces are actually in this first 5-year catalog of pieces. And so we would love to hear from you guys as far as what your thoughts are, and I know Anthony has some questions that we'll ask you. And so Sue, would you mind introducing yourself? And
my name is Sue Latta. I've lived in Boise since 1992 and have been a working artist for all of that time, so I've been around for a long time doing this thing. I was honored to be included in the book, and I think the book is really beautiful. So well done. It is a nice hardcover coffee table style book that I am really proud to own myself. So don't forget to go to the link. Just trying to help you out here.
Thank you.
So I was a member of Swell Artist Collective. I didn't do the first year, but I did the second year, 2017, and then the 2020 show, which was an adventure for everybody. So the 2017 was Escape Stories, and that was really fun. And I came to the meeting, and they were handing out stories, and I got this story, and I was like, I don't like this story. And so someone said to me, hey, I have a story that you might like, and they traded with me, which was awesome. So I got the story of 3 women who had escaped, and they were all forgers. And I picked one woman who I thought would photograph really well, that would be very a graphic image, like her face did that for me. And she had the best number. So her number was 10101. Which is just a beautiful number, and I'm that weirdo that likes numbers. So I created basically a story of her story, and called the piece "Flight of the Forger," which was they had all been convicted of forgery, which I thought was a really interesting. These 3 women escaped together that were all forgers. I don't even know how that happens. All of them ended up back in prison. One of them, her parents actually told her she had to go back to prison, but. The stories were really interesting, and ultimately the piece spoke to them as forgers and them behind bars, and then their flight. So it depicts the bird out from behind the bars. And it was really fun. It was fun to make, and I'm really happy that it's in the book. So it's forever part of the history of the show and of the penitentiary. The one I did in 2020 was a 3-part piece that told the story of a woman who had been convicted of manslaughter, and she shot her lover because he was leaving her. And so the piece is called A Woman Scorned, and which is also a really fun story to tell. Like, basically is that one piece shows the broken heart, one piece shows the gun and the blood splatter, and the third piece is her and her story and her number, and a newspaper article from that time period is included in the piece. So they were all really fun to make, and I really have enjoyed being a part of this exhibition. Yeah. So hopefully I'll get to do it again.
What is your medium, and how did you adapt telling a historical premise through your medium? Because you have such a unique style that I'm just super curious if you've ever created art with a subject matter like this prior to this.
I do a lot of storytelling in my work. So telling these stories is not completely outside of my wheelhouse. I work with image transfer on resin, and then cast resin, and steel and wood, and a variety of medium. I think of myself as a relief sculptor, right? Like, all of the work is wall hanging work, but it's all sculptural in some way. Yeah. So the Flight of the Forgers, I built 3 windows, if you will, into the story that were kind of all part of one piece. And that had a steel frame and a big blue sky, and then these little windows that I created. And the 2020 piece, the manslaughter piece, Katie Shoup, I think is her name, had these 3 individual steel frames with these cast resin pieces with images behind them. So there was a cast resin anatomical heart with the broken wall and the blood trickling down behind it, which I just think is, they're so emblematic of these ideas, right? Mm-hmm. The broken heart. And then, you can't go wrong with a toy gun as a cast. And I found the perfect toy gun to cast at the Antique World Mall, which is one of my favorite sources of inspiration. And then I believe the newspaper article, the copy of the newspaper article actually came as part of my story. So thank you for that. Yeah. So I included that in the ultimate image. So it's a really fun process, and building story, and kind of having this story as a problem to solve is really the way I work. Yeah. So
during the show, when we do this, kind of typically one night, friends, guests come in, do you ever overhear, just kind of sit around the piece to overhear? And I mean, you're pretty locally famous. My wife and I told her, I was like, I'm interviewing Sue Latta right now. And she was like, what? She's so jealous. But what do you hear, like, when your pieces were up? Or did you get certain questions about your approach or anything like that? What kind of discussions occurred around your piece?
It was a long time ago. So the 2017 piece, I got to come to the show, but the 2020 show, I didn't get to come. And I can't remember if it had anything to do with COVID or if it conflicted with the first Thursday. I had my show at, I had a featured artist at Capitol Contemporary Gallery, and this thing was happening all at the same time. And it happened, my studio had just been broken into, so
That's right.
like all of this stuff had happened all at the same time, and one of the pieces for this show was actually broken in that, and we hung it anyway. Like, it got broken in the vandalism, and we hung the piece anyway. It's this one.
Okay.
The one with the heart. Like, it was a broken heart, and it was broken. It was so conceptually sound. It was beautiful. And then, and so I didn't get to come to the show. So sometimes I get to be a fly on the wall and listen to what people are saying, and sometimes I don't have that opportunity. So I don't know.
Yeah.
You just have to imagine the compliments.
I just have to imagine, yeah. I want to hear people say, wow, that's cool. That's really my favorite.
Yeah. Nice. And did you have like a process of interpreting historical events? Did that change or alter your view of making art? I know your story is like the basis of a lot of your pieces, but did looking at history or tying history into your art making alter your art making at all?
I think history is part of every art piece.
Yeah.
It's like, because you can't make art in a vacuum. Like, nothing exists without everything that has come before, right? And so I think that all of the history we know becomes reference for how we read an artwork, and I think of all the work that I make that way.
Yeah.
So the heart, the broken heart, like, everybody has that reference, right? And whether it's historical reference or as a personal history reference, that's what we're drawing on when we're reading artwork. So I use it every day.
Has your perspective on the Old Pen changed since being a participant in this?
I think so. The Old Pen is home to this really great thing, this really great opportunity for artists and for the community to see these interpretations. I think that it is a very forward-thinking kind of way to look at these stories, and it's also, it adds interest to these stories to have the artist's version represented. So I really love the book. Like, I think this is a brilliant, beautiful thing to do, and I'm certain that people are gonna love it. That the community is gonna love it. That the people who come to the Old Pen are gonna love it.
Thanks for being a big part of it. Yeah.
So you mentioned, having these preserved in the book forever, and I think that that is what resonated with a lot of people when we were getting this off the ground a few years ago, and why we were able to do it, right? I mean, a book like this that's coming from a history institution, right? And doing it the right way, and doing it to where it's nice and isn't cheap, for lack of a better word, took getting a lot of people on board, and that is what we how we framed it. And so I'm glad that you guys see that, because we did get grant funding from the Idaho Humanities Council and the Idaho Commission on the Arts, because they saw both its value as a history resource and an art book, and it's going to exist as both of those things. And so yeah,
absolutely.
I think it's so multifaceted. You can kind of metaphorically look at it like you do the folks who serve time here, right? That there's a lot of lenses to look at the value of this and to look at their lives through.
Yeah, I love to think of it as kind of a time capsule. 50 years down the road, we're going to be like, who was making art in Boise, in the Northwest, in Idaho, back in the early 2000s, and what were they doing? And we've got this awesome collection of history and 70 plus local artists that will be preserved in Idaho history now. Like, man, it's just such a cool little glimpse at this time period, and even through COVID, being part of the 2020 show. Yeah. It's amazing that we could still hold it, and that we're still sharing history and creating art, and life goes on. It's beautiful.
I think of it as kind of a legacy piece.
Yeah.
And for those of you who were excited to pick up a copy, we also did include some galleries in between all of the amazing local artwork that can only be seen here in a lot of cases. So it also includes a lot of stories and photos of resident artwork from when the site was open, so images from the prison newspapers and publications like The Clock and the Wall City Bulletin, tattoos, and the art classes that they took here. Found art like etchings throughout the site, things that were painted in the cells, or the ornate cemetery stones that have survived. Hobbycraft. Some of those hobbycrafts tell some really personal stories of folks while they were incarcerated and what they poured themselves into. And so you kind of also get that when you're looking through this as well.
With your piece, The Broken Heart, it's iconic, it's universal, you see it immediately, and it creates feelings in the viewer. Of course, I feel like with your other piece, The Flight, and the representing flying as freedom, I thought is a very interesting universal theme to put in that piece, that people can see it, and even without knowing it is an escape piece, it already is invoking emotion in the viewer, and I think that I like that a great deal.
Well, thank you.
And Skye actually did the majority of the writing for one of yours and all of yours, and the research for Caddy Shoop and these women's stories that you were handed. So she kind of did a lot of the background information, and we kind of interpreted her very large bio into one page that then you get to absorb and adapt and maybe dig further into if you wanted to.
And I will say too, because there was one show that I really was there and did a lot of the research for, but it was so cool to see how all of the artists took that story that I knew through documents, through words, and to be able to turn it into an image is a really great talent. And again, like you guys are saying, it's very cool from sort of, if I can vaguely consider myself an artist with words and with research, it's cool to see one artistry taken into a literal artistry. So.
Chopsy, can we hear a bit about yourself, about your, where born, raised, where you work, how long you've been doing the show?
So this year is my 6th year doing the show. I was actually born in California and moved to Idaho in '98, right before my 16th birthday. Oh. And I've pretty much just been in the Boise area since then, except for the 2 years I left and went to Washington. And then when I came back from Washington in 2019 is when I got into Swell and started doing the Swell shows in 32 cells. And I've been doing it ever since then.
So you've participated in 6. Mm-hmm. What was your first one?
My first one was the Arts and Rec year. And I didn't realize that was the theme when I started it. So I initially did the big piece I ended up doing 3 pieces for it, because I did the first one, which was like a car chase scene from my story and then realized that it was supposed to be arts and rec, so I panicked to do 2 more pieces that represented the work he did making the license plates and him playing on the football team.
Oh my gosh.
Which is how I ended up with 3 pieces for the show.
I thought you were just prolific, that you just start going and you can't stop. You just keep creating.
No, I panicked and created more to go with it. I mean, I had plenty of time. It wasn't like I was going right up to the line, so it was easy to get more pieces done for it.
Yeah.
And then instead of just submitting one, I decided to do all 3 as kind of like a triptych.
And they're all meaningful. They all make sense with the story and everything else.
I would have never known that. That piece specifically, I always thought of it as like a story.
Yeah.
I always thought you were telling a story. I would have never guessed. That's fascinating.
It was I was experimenting with medium that year because I usually do a lot of like ink and pen type artwork, and I wanted to do it on wood, but I didn't necessarily want to do like an acrylic painting. So I started drawing on the pieces of wood with ink and realizing how much it was going to like absorb the ink and soak into it. And so all 3 of them were completely done with India ink, even the colors. But I had to keep going back over them because it would soak into the wood and then lighten up.
Oh my God.
Wow.
So it was something I was not prepared for when I started it, but I thought they turned out great. So
I'm kind of curious about both of your approaches. When you receive the bio, is there a feeling of dread, like how am I going to do this, or do you instantly just kind of have your wheels turning?
I do a lot of comics and zines and illustration. Like I have a hard time breaking a story down into a single piece to represent it. I tend to draw lots of drawings to actually just tell a full story, which is how I ended up doing my piece for 2020. But I usually get a pretty good visual just reading the story. It's just a matter of trying to focus, like, how am I going to do this in just one piece, which I always struggle with. So
Yeah, well, we feel the same when writing the bios. It's how do we make this 300 words?
Oh, I'm sure.
What are the key elements that are essential to telling a story that maybe an artist can pick up on? Yeah, I love that. And did you ever, either of you, did you come out to the Old Pen after receiving the story for inspiration, or were you already familiar enough that you just jumped into it?
I was familiar with the Pen because the Old Pen is one of my favorite places to just go hang out. I like historic sites. I do like underground tours and things like that. And since this one's local, it's really easy to just come out with the kids and my wife and just hang out for the day. Yeah. So I was already very familiar with the site before I even started doing the swell shows.
Yeah.
You know, I was familiar from tours that I'd been on and stuff before, so I didn't come out specifically to hang out with Caddy Shoop, but familiar enough with the sense of it.
Yeah. Has this changed your perspective on the Old Pen since being part of the show?
The Old Pen itself, maybe a little bit. I've never been a huge fan of the prison system as a whole anyways, but as a historical site and preserving the history of the people that served here, whether imprisoned or worked here, I feel is very important, because a lot of the time when you're reading about history or you're in school, they kind of gloss over a lot of things, and it's kind of the cliff notes of like, what's the absolute minimum you need to know about what happened during this event. And I feel the Old Pen and the history here is being preserved exceptionally well, and telling all these stories that you might not hear in a daily aspect from any other source.
Yeah. Have you been the fly on the wall, like listening as people observe your pieces, or your family or friends, have they commented on things?
No, not really. I don't hang out by my piece at the shows. I tend to walk around and look at other people's, and then try and like socialize and mingle with my artist friends or whoever's hanging out at the time. Yeah. Because family and friends typically will tell you what you did was great, even if it's not. And so that's just a family dynamic thing. So I typically don't have very much self-reflection. I've mentioned that to you before. So I don't really hang out at my piece. I usually just do a piece mostly for myself and then just kind of leave it.
Let it live. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, at the end of the day, what I interpret from what I did might not be what someone else interpreted from it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. You're both so story-driven. Has this changed your, either the way you approach creating art, or maybe the resources that you utilize, like digging deep into history to tell stories? Or
I mean, I tend to read and watch a lot of historical documentary stuff, so I don't know that it's changed. It's just added a few more elements to what I do, and a little more, I don't know how to phrase it, I think a little more critically about what I'm researching, as opposed to just reading it and then moving on.
Yeah.
So
Interesting. You kind of alluded to it. Has your thoughts on the criminal justice system shifted by zeroing in on one individual who was incarcerated here and like learning about this individual?
not necessarily. I kind of feel like there are no real winners in it, between the guards that have to work here, the people that are in prison, the whole system. No, I don't feel like anyone really benefits from it. So, I mean, sure, people get paid to be employed here, but I don't think any of them are having like the greatest time, even when they're not the prisoner. So,
Yeah, I kind of have that same question for you. If this has altered your perspective on the criminal justice system.
Well, historically, this prison, it was 101 years
Right on.
to 1973. I think that the criminal justice system has changed a lot in that time period, and probably not for the better. It seems like the old pen offered them some opportunities to, arts and crafts, and like they did things. They played baseball. And I don't know that the current housing situation of prisoners is offering them much of those kinds of opportunities. So, and I know very little about the contemporary prison system, but just based on my cursory knowledge, I think it's not for the better.
Yeah, this year we're really fortunate. We actually have art being brought in from the Idaho Department of Corrections from currently incarcerated individuals that will be on display at next week's 32 Cells art show. So
nice.
We're trying to bridge that, and there is still a little bit, there's a bit of art being made out there, and I actually have a piece in my office right now that is a photorealistic painting of a deer. I'm pretty sure it's not a photograph, right? It's so
incredible.
It's incredibly realistic. It's some of the talent out there. It's seen. It's just having the officers and the staffing to allow some of that creative reflection to go out, and budget and all that stuff. Oh.
Well, and it just goes to show that people need art.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
In any circumstance.
Yeah.
People need art, and we'll make art, and we'll find a way
Yeah.
to make art.
Yeah. I don't know how to frame this question, but it's something that we, like at the podcast, I struggle with, telling somebody's personal story, the lowest part of their life. Have you ever had a conversation with the other artists that participate in the show, or have you had those thoughts of like, is this okay that I'm interpreting this person's story? This is probably the worst part of their life. This photograph is from a time when everything is stripped from them. Have you had those thoughts, those discussions on like, is it right? Is it okay that we're doing this? Something I struggle with working here,
Yeah.
Is it okay that I'm telling these stories here and here we are shining a light and having artists zero in and tell that story and interpret it, but with their own spirit and their own hearts and compassion and feelings.
I've never really thought about that. Though when I approach the stories and the pieces, I always try and look at it and think, how can I interpret this that honors them and doesn't make them feel bad if they're still alive or their families. Like, I want the families to be able to see the piece and feel like it's a good representation of their family member that was incarcerated here.
I feel like that it brings a humanity to them. I mean, that's the way I approach the pieces. I think about, I make up a backstory, right? Like about how they lived and about, just because that's what I do. In my head, I tell stories all the time. So I make up a story and I have an empathy for them, and I try to put that into the piece, because what's true is that most people, this is just like the worst mistake they made in their life. I mean, certainly that's not everybody, but for most of the people, and certainly these women that I have represented, this is, this terrible moment, and they're a full human outside of this terrible moment and this moment of incarceration or whatever it is. Like they had lives before, they had lives after, they probably had families and maybe children or whatever. It's like there was a much bigger story.
Yeah, I can definitely say from experience. We've been doing again 9 years of doing this, right? And especially in my previous role of coordinating the show, most people, most all of the artists take that approach too, and I think that's why I've felt. That's, I think, why I felt a value in it. I absolutely get the question, and it's something we think about constantly. But I don't think I've ever seen anyone participate in this show and not turn in something where they put themselves in the position of the person and tried to at least get one layer into their humanity and past the facts of their circumstances, right? And so that's why it's beyond the interpretation that we can do sometimes, because it gives people another way to look at things, another lens to look through things, and a way to hook them into learning the history more than just their mugshot photograph would.
Question I often get asked by guests and listeners of the show is, they say, you spend this amount of hours researching someone, when you get done, do you feel like you know them? And it's kind of a tough question because, I'm only knowing mostly government documents and newspapers. But it's fair. If you spend that many hours with someone, you feel like you know at least parts of their personality, parts of how they would have behaved in certain situations. With you two spending as many hours as you do creating this work, this art, do you feel like you get to know the subjects a little bit? Do you feel like you get to know the story in a way you wouldn't if you hadn't have spent that many hours on that specific topic in person?
Yes.
Yeah, I definitely say you do. I mean, I don't know about Sue, but while I'm working on the pieces, I am constantly thinking about the story that was presented to us, and a lot of the times you can almost put yourself in their shoes and understand why things went the way they did that got them incarcerated. Not that you would necessarily make the same decision they did, but you can almost understand why they made that decision. So it's kind of hard to not feel bad for some of these people.
Yeah, so when I think about Katie's story, or Caddy,
Shoop, yeah.
Caddy, I felt a little brokenhearted, and I can see that act of passion that would bring you to murder your boyfriend, or your ex-boyfriend, however that really was. So I kind of like he said, I put myself in her shoes, and I told the story because this is what I have from my perspective, right? I told her story from my perspective because that's the only perspective I have. So, I put myself in her shoes. And, when I think about the flight of the forgers, when I think about those women, I think about the limited opportunities that were available to women to be able to support themselves. And, sometimes we make decisions based in survival, and, it's like, those are the stories that I told for them, right? So, I think maybe I'm completely wrong in my stories, but those are the kind of stories I make up.
I love that. Have you thought of any themes that you wish that we would do sometime? Or subject matters at the site?
No.
I think death row.
Death row, okay.
Would be powerful.
Right?
Yeah.
Would be powerful.
Capital punishment.
Yeah. I mean, am I wrong in that we didn't execute too many people here?
10.
Yeah. See, that's not in 100 years. That doesn't seem like very many. Right. Texas does that in a month, I think.
But there were a lot of people who were in death row and were reprieved, or had other tragic endings, and so Yeah.
There could easily be 32 stories associated with death rows.
Oh, certainly.
Yeah.
There's also, we could extend beyond our time here. There's a lot of options there.
The 16 county executions took place before 1899. And then that's a little bit out of our normal range, but I think that would be a fascinating addition.
Yeah. The ultimate crime, the ultimate punishment. I could definitely see that being an engaging show. Maybe a dark one.
Yeah.
Well, and it's, the last year, it's been a major topic of local news.
Absolutely.
Too, with 2 different incidents, right? Thomas Creech and Chad Daybell. And so...
Wow, I like it. Okay. Well, stay tuned. Future show. Any ideas for you, Chopsy?
None. I'm always surprised by the themes you guys come up with, and I'm always just excited to see, like, what am I going to get this year? What can I do with this one? So,
yeah, Samuel spearheaded this year.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So the theme this year was occupations. And then we discussed a bunch of themes, and we wanted to have one that could reflect a part of their identity that wasn't necessarily associated with the prison. Though many of them, as you mentioned previously, did impact it. A lot of the women were housewives, they were chambermaids, and that definitely plays into that conversation about forgery. This year, Chopsy's did a piece on Tex, Oscar Selim Herbert, who I did an episode about last season. And he was a cowboy, and he murdered Dutch John in something that is still kind of debated today, whether it was a gunfight or assassination or something else. And your piece this year is Tex as a cowboy, as he's out with the cattle. And it's awesome to write this story, and especially when it's hard not to get zoned in on the crime and his time in prison, especially because he had some dramatic things happen to him in prison, and to see your painting and see a part of him and a part of his identity that isn't represented in his number or the trauma he experienced in prison or before prison. And I really appreciate the way these art can make you have different perspectives on these individuals.
Yeah.
How can listeners find you, your art, your websites, follow your trajectory as an artist?
SueLatta.com.
You can get to pretty much everything I do through itsmechopsy.com.
All right, and those will be linked in the description.
Again, thank you all for having me, for joining us, Sue and Ryan, and yeah, this has been a amazing project in a long series of projects we've been working on and are coming up, and so we're very excited for people to see this book.
Yeah.
Thank you for the invitation.
Of course, yeah. I have to say that the book looks beautiful. It's been a lot of work, and I think we've done justice to the artists and the figures that they're covering. And there's a ton of amazing history and art in these pieces, and I think anybody can learn a lot about the site's history, about Idaho history, about national history through ties to this book. So pick up a copy.
Yeah, it's going to be for sale at the 2024 show on August 17th. The first time you'll be able to come and just grab a copy and buy it. And another cool thing is that we had a group of artists, you included Ryan, here out a while back to sign the first 100 copies. And so that'll be where we pull from first on the 17th, and after that it'll be available on our website, which Anthony said we'll have the link in the description. It'll be here at the Old Pen in our store and at the Idaho State Museum too. And I know I've got a lot of people who are going to get it for Christmas, right? So yeah,
that's great. All right, we have one last question. This is a podcast about the Old Idaho Penitentiary. One of their mottos was "Do your own time," followed by another response. How would you respond to that? Do your own time.
That's a tough question.
What's the first thing that would come to your mind if I told you to do your own time?
Make great art.
I love it.
Nice.
That's great.
This will pass.
This will pass?
Yeah.
I like it. All right, do your own time, make great art. This will pass.
Can I answer?
Yeah, of course.
I feel like I would say, do your own number.
Wow. Jacey's been on the podcast several times. That's great. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. Do your own time.
Do your own number.
And also, guess what? We have a new season coming next month. Mark your calendars. Thank you for listening.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Thanks, bye.
If you enjoyed Behind Gray Walls, please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. Not only do we get to hear your feedback about the show, but it helps others find us as well. Follow our Facebook group at Behind Gray Walls Podcast. We have a podcast Instagram as well. You can find us on Instagram at Behind Gray Walls Pod.
I mean, the book's amazing. I love every piece that's in it. I think everyone did a great job. So I definitely think anyone that likes the penitentiary or just art in general, it's something they should own.